With the next awesome presentation, which is Sarah Woodcock, who will be speaking on the foundation of justice, veganism, and the animal rights movement. We're very, very excited to have Sarah here with us today. She is actually the founder and executive director of the Advocacy and Veganism Society, otherwise known as TAVS. TAVS is an all-volunteer vegan education organization that educates non-vegans about veganism and provides vegans with resources for their vegan advocacy, something we all definitely need. TAVS takes a pro-intersectional approach, rejecting all forms of oppression to honor the foundation of justice upon which veganism rests. Sarah is an adopted Korean-American vegan. She lives in Minneapolis with her husband and adopted animals. Please join me in welcoming Sarah to the conference.
Hello, everyone. So, first, just a shout out to the panel of the wonderful individuals that went before me. It was really enlightening and I learned a lot, so thank you for that. My name is Sarah K. Woodcock. I'm the founder and executive director of TAVS, which stands for the Advocacy of Veganism Society. As Linda mentioned, TAVS is an all-volunteer vegan education and advocacy organization. Our mission at TAVS is to galvanize and facilitate an organized grassroots movement of veganism around the world that reflects our recognition of the moral personhood of other animals. We educate non-vegans about veganism with in-person advocacy as well as high-impact ad campaigns. We're currently running a national vegan bus ad campaign. It kicked off in Minneapolis earlier this year, and it is running soon in New York. Any day now, it actually might have just started, and coming to Los Angeles soon. And we are currently raising money to run it in Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, and some other cities. 4 other cities to be determined. If you are not yet vegan, thank you so much for coming. I encourage you to visit www.whyveganism.com. That's our educational veganism website, and you can learn about veganism there and the beautiful ethical position that it is. And you can also request a free veganism starter kit there. So TAVS also provides unequivocal vegan resources, such as our popular Why Veganism leaflet. And we provide them to vegans all around the world, actually in several languages. Our leaflets are currently available in English, Spanish, French, German, Lithuanian, Portuguese, as well as Norwegian, and some other languages to come. And if you're already vegan, I encourage you to visit tavs.org for free vegan resources that we offer for you to do vegan advocacy in your communities. So in addition to our leaflets, we also offer vegan info sheets, bookmarks, stickers, buttons, and more. Everything is unequivocally vegan. It's one of the things that differentiates TAVS from other animal organizations. And it's also designed from a pro-intersectional perspective. So we brought samples of our resources for you, each of you actually, and out on the table, when you walk into the theater building, there's a leaflet with samples in there for you, so you're all welcome to take those. Check them out, and then after you go vegan, if you're talking with someone about veganism, you can direct them to whyveganism.com to learn more about veganism and to request that free veganism starter kit. So today, I'm going to share a lot of different ideas with you. Main thing I'm going to talk about is all in the context of the power of consistency in the animal rights movement and beyond. So we're going to explore together where the animal rights movement fits in the overall landscape of social justice and how we as vegans can and should apply consistency both inside the movement as well as outside the movement in order to make it stronger and more successful. The biggest threat to the animal rights movement and its success today is the movement's own refusal to apply the principle of justice consistently. The movement violates animal rights, which are an extension of justice, by pursuing and promoting welfare reform, animal welfare reform, and other positions less than veganism. And the movement violates human rights, which are an extension of justice, by refusing to take issues of racism, sexism, and other forms of injustice seriously, and make every effort to rid the movement of them. The movement does not have a fighting chance at success as long as it continues to brush off criticisms of these rights violations. Addressing these criticisms and turning around the movement will not be easy. It will, in fact, take a lot of dedication and hard work, both introspectively as well as outwardly in how we act in the movement and the campaigns that we engage in. But if we as vegans truly care about justice and not just selective justice, our path is clear. And whether we as vegans truly care about the animals remains to be seen. So how do we apply the principle of justice consistently? Well, we need to understand how justice relates to the animal rights movement and where the animal rights movement itself sits in relation to other social justice movements. I created this diagram and I call it the House of Justice. The foundation is along the bottom, and that represents universal principles and values such as justice, equality, fairness, and love. There are many forces that work against a society being just, equal, fair, and loving, such as, we've heard them, capitalism, white supremacy, and patriarchy, just to name a few of the forces. So we have these pillars that come up from the foundation of justice, and those emerge as representing movements of anti-oppression. So we have the pillars of anti-ableism, anti-ageism, anti-cisgenderism, anti-classism, anti-heterosexism, anti-sizeism, anti-sexism, anti-racism, and antispeciesism. To be clear, this isn't an exhaustive list of all anti-oppression movements and theories, but they're just some examples to give you an idea of the movements that are operating as a foundation of the universal principles and values. The pillars, as you can see coming up from the foundation, support, ideally, a just, equal, fair, and loving society at the top. Importantly, with each form of oppression, such as racism, sexism, or speciesism, there's an oppressing or privileged class, and there's an oppressed class. For example, with racism, the oppressing class is the white class, and the oppressed class is everyone else. With sexism, the oppressing class is cisgender straight men, and the oppressed class is everyone else. With speciesism, the oppressing class is humans, and the oppressed class is other animals. So social justice movements are an important part of each pillar, and members of each social justice movement are working to bring about a just society for members of its corresponding oppressed class. For example, one component of the anti-racism movement is the Black Lives Matter movement, and one component of the anti-sexism movement is the feminist movement. Now, here's where pro-intersectionality comes in. Someone can occupy more than one oppressed class and more than one oppressing class at the same time. You may be wondering at this point why I refer to intersectionality as pro-intersectionality. It's to show deference to Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and show that I am for taking a pro-intersectional approach. So by referring to it as pro-intersectionality, it shows hopefully respect for Dr. Crenshaw, who coined the term, and her work, and it reminds others about not forgetting why the term intersectionality was originally coined. Dr. Crenshaw's work was originally needed because looking at systems as if they exist in a vacuum, such as racism or sexism, as separate forces, fails everyone who exists at the intersection of those oppressions. Intersectionality was originally meant to refer to Black women and how the legal system fails them because it would look at legal cases in terms of how one's race or one's gender, but the victimization she experienced was at the intersection of her race and her gender. So I do want to just be clear that the term intersectionality is oftentimes used in a way that seems to oversimplify, especially in the animal rights movement, and underrepresent what it really means. It's oftentimes used sort of as a catch-all for anything and everything that has to do with oppression or discrimination, but that's simply not what the term was meant to describe. So never forget, I like to remind everyone, never forget, please, that it was originally meant to refer to the experiences of Black women. We in the animal rights movement, we really need to be cognizant of the fact that each oppressed class and each individual that occupies it has its own unique advantages, disadvantages, struggles, voices, and paths to liberation. And I think a lot of those are going to be explored in talks today, so it's really great that you showed up here. So we mustn't be siloed or isolated in working in individual streams as if these issues don't cross paths or that they aren't inextricably intertwined in our efforts to achieve liberation. As Dr. Crenshaw said, feminist efforts to politicize the experiences of women and anti-racist efforts to politicize experiences of people of color have frequently proceeded as though the issues and experiences they each detail occur on mutually exclusive terrains. Although racism and sexism readily intersect in the lives of real people, they seldom do in feminist and anti-racist practices. In other words, liberation for everyone will be born out of a pro-intersectional approach. Liberation for everyone depends upon a pro-intersectional approach, and honoring the foundation of justice, basically which refers back to the House of Justice, requires us not to be siloed in our efforts as we attempt to achieve liberation. All right, so we've laid the foundation. We've talked about the House of Justice with the foundation of its universal principles and values, and we've covered a really brief introduction to intersectionality and pro-intersectionality as terms, and we've talked about how we really mustn't be siloed in our efforts to achieve liberation, for that betrays the very foundation of justice that we claim that the animal rights movement sits upon. So next I'm going to talk about some ways that the movement violates human rights and animal rights. So we're going to cover a lot of ground, and I'm probably going to challenge your thinking about both human rights and animal rights a lot. I can't tell you how much my personal advocacy has changed since I entered the movement. It has changed drastically as I've been exposed to new ideas, and I think this is a really good thing. When I first entered the movement, I thought vegans were the most progressive people on the planet. And I'm really embarrassed to say that I used to think the animal rights movement was the final frontier of justice. It's a little embarrassing. And that the animal rights movement was, quote, the greatest social justice movement of all time. Yay! I trusted the big orgs to know what was best for animals. I trusted them with my money. I trusted them with my volunteer time, my limited volunteer time. We all have a max on what our availability is. And I trusted them ultimately with the animals. Some vegans certainly are very progressive, so I don't want to paint, with my embarrassment there that they're not. And our movement actually is very progressive in some ways, but there are just some reactionary ideas that I think we need to address and rid our movement of. And the idea here is that if we allow ourselves to be challenged with new thoughts, we may learn something new, we may grow, we may solidify ourselves in our current thoughts even more. And if we do these things, we improve our advocacy and we make our own advocacy and then therefore the movement stronger. So who's ready to dive into the different ideas here? So first I'd like to take a little time to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. I really love the BLM movement. I have learned so much from it. I have watched how advocates in that movement have been pushing for racial justice, and I've watched how they've really, truly started a national conversation. The movement's really captivated my heart. Late this summer, I did attend a BLM rally for Philando Castile, who was shot and killed on July 6th in Minnesota this year. You may have seen the heartbreaking video on Facebook that his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, live streamed as he was bleeding to death. Those who disagree with my anti-racism work in the animal rights movement say things like, stop dividing everything with race. You and your obsession with race and racism, that's the problem. You keep bringing it up, you're the problem, we need to unify. But you know what? At the BLM rally that I attended, there were black people, there were brown people, there were yellow people, there were red people, there were young people, there were old people. There were people from so many diverse backgrounds. And as I marched with them, I'll tell you this, I've never felt unity like I felt at that rally. We were gathered from diverse backgrounds and we were gathered for justice. We knew that there was a problem, that there is a problem, and we came from all sorts of backgrounds and showed up to be part of something. And I learned that night that unity will never happen through these false calls for unity and these false calls for stop talking about race, stop talking about racism, that somehow discussing the problem is the problem. Unity will never happen so long as we blame those who are being victimized for the harms that are perpetrated upon them. Unity will never happen so long as we respond to the simple idea that Black lives matter with all lives matter. So, say that in the movement, I've seen it justified, it's disgusting. Get that bullshit out of the movement. Unity will only happen when we face ourselves and our discriminations that each of us have. Our discriminations and our prejudices that we all have from living in this racist society, and we have to explore them and we have to own them. But then here's the important part. We have to go through them. We can't go around these uncomfortable situations. We have to go through them. Unity for us as a movement, and unity even beyond this movement, is on the other side of our discomfort. It's on the other side of our fear. One of the ways some vegans seek to go around these uncomfortable situations is with the Nonhumans First ideology. The proponents of the Nonhumans First ideology use the animals and their concern for the animals as justification for dismissing human concerns and human issues. The Nonhumans First attitude is not radical. I know those who enact the Nonhumans First attitude act as if they're the real radicals that actually put the animals first and their interests first, but I don't buy that lie, neither should you. Radical is that which will deconstruct oppressive systems and construct just systems, such as the work Brenda Sanders does that she's going to be talking about later. Definitely watch out for that talk, it's going to be fabulous. The Nonhumans First attitude is reactionary. That is, it is an attitude that longs for the good old days that weren't that good for those who weren't white, cisgender, heterosexual, middle or upper class, able-bodied young men. Those who enact the Nonhumans First attitude are actually upholding the ideologies and systems that ensure that other animals will never know justice. If we really believe that all forms of oppression are unjust and interrelated, then we know that denying other humans justice is denying other animals justice as well. So as a vegan of color, I urge white vegans in the movement to listen to vegans of color when it comes to racism and how we experience it in the world and in the vegan movement, and continue to educate themselves and reflect on their own role that they have in making the movement a safer space for people of color, and to continue to contribute to creating and maintaining a pro-intersectional vegan community. Because as long as that Nonhumans First attitude prevails and the vegan movement fails to take a pro-intersectional approach, justice will never be achieved. Another way the movement is really oppressive is that it is rampant with sexism. There is, quite frankly, way too much on this topic for me to cover today, but I really do recommend that you check out Vegan Feminist Network by Dr. Corey Lee Wren. She's written extensively about vegan feminism and critiqued the movement for several years. The website for that is www.veganfeministnetwork.com. So now we've talked about some of the ways the movement violates human rights. Next, we're going to talk about some of the ways the movement violates animal rights. Some terminology and some ways that we can protect the pro-intersectional vegan movement from speciesism and help ensure that we aren't replicating the very system of oppression we're dedicated to ending. So, veganism. The word vegan was coined in 1945 by Donald Watson and Dorothy Morgan, who's often left out of the definition, of the Vegan Society of the UK. Well, early writings by an involved member of the Vegan Society in the early days wrote, his name was Leslie J. Cross, he mentioned veganism being about, quote, the principle of the emancipation of animals from exploitation by man. The Vegan Society updated the definition of veganism eventually in 1979 to be what you may see on the screen here. Veganism is a way of living that seeks to exclude as far as possible and practicable all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, and any other purpose. But either definition, note, please, that it specifically refers to the exploitation of and cruelty to animals. It's not a catch-all term for anything and everything good, moral, or ethical. Sometimes people will say, well, humans are animals, implying that veganism includes human interests too. Well, yes, humans are animals, but the Vegan Society was clearly referring to other animals here, as they are the ones who are used right now for food, clothing, and other purposes. So we shouldn't be obtuse, especially when taking a oppressed class analysis, that the definition of veganism does specifically relate to other animals. The fact that humans are also animals should not be used to invade veganism and the concept of it itself. Indeed, for humans to make veganism in the oppressing class about themselves, something that was meant to protect the oppressed class, it would be one of the most speciesist things that we could do. So in short, I refer to veganism as the ethical position against animal exploitation and use and the corresponding way of living. So while we're on the topic of veganism and the ethical position that it is, I want to address a misconception that I've started to see pop up in the vegan movement within the last year or so. It's pretty recent. Veganism is, of course, the ethical position against animal exploitation and use by humans. And agreeing with the ethical position, it almost always requires changes throughout every part of one's life. So food, clothing, and personal care, to entertainment and testing for medical advancements. But just because one changes their food or clothing choices, for example, doesn't mean that veganism itself is about food or clothing, or personal choices at all. Indeed, veganism is an anti-speciesist political position for animal rights and a necessary part of a complete social justice framework. And this is where we have strength when we engage with other movements, is that indeed veganism and the animal rights movement is a very valid part of an overall social justice framework, but it doesn't represent the whole framework. So what I've observed is that numerous animal advocates who position themselves as radical, or the real radicals again, claim that veganism is about consumerism because it oftentimes reflects a change in what we eat and wear and use. But this claim is not only factually untrue, it's really problematic because it depoliticizes veganism, and it's therefore one of the most anti-radical positions that one can take when it comes to animal rights, especially given the constant misrepresentation of veganism in mainstream media and even actually in the vegan movement. So continuing on with just some terms that I like to discuss and offer possible clarity on. This is after a lot of thought and analysis, some terminology that how I think about these terms now. So plant-based, what is plant-based? So vegan and plant-based are often interchanged these days, right? So I used to think that it didn't really matter. Like if I posted my lunch or if I posted a picture of going out to a restaurant, didn't really matter if I hashtagged that with like vegan or plant-based or veganism or whatever. But now I actually believe that it's really critically important for us as vegans not to interchange these terms. Plant-based in and of itself is pretty liberal, but it doesn't have that political anti-speciesist charge to it because it can bridge across the health-based movement, the environmental movement, etc. Vegan, we need to protect the politicization of that term. So food or even clothing can be plant-based, that is, it is made up of plants. But veganism does not equal plant-based. They're not the same thing. So veganism is not a diet, and then therefore being vegan is not the same as being plant-based. They're different things. So right here, we do have to start to be clear about the differences between the reason for veganism, that is the animals, and the benefits of veganism. So there are numerous benefits, and these are absolutely great to talk about, but we need to frame them as that these are benefits of veganism. So we have the health benefits, the environmental benefits, the spiritual benefits even. Sometimes there can be financial benefits if you adopt a plant-based diet and you end up sometimes saving money. So it is only by being clear about what veganism is and isn't that we can hope to achieve justice for animals. Being clear about terminology is part of what I consider to be like part of anti-speciesism in action. Because when it comes to it, as a member of the oppressing class, it's all about actions. It's about what we do with this information. It's not just about stopping and saying, I'm vegan, that's it. So again, just being clear about the reasons versus the benefits. The reason for veganism is other animals, and the benefits of veganism are multitudinous. As my friend John Talent says, no amount of concern for the environment or your health adds up necessarily to veganism if the basis of your concern doesn't rest on ending the use and exploitation of non-human animals. After all, how does a plant-based diet help a snake or a lizard being exploited and killed to make boots? It doesn't. How does a plant-based diet help a monkey who's being tortured in a vivisection lab? It doesn't. How does the big org's obsession with meat and going veg help that monkey who's trapped in the lab? It doesn't. This is why it's so critically important that we be clear about these terms. Veganism is what helps that snake, that lizard, that monkey, as well as farmed animals. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong at all with adopting a plant-based diet for the health benefits or to lessen one's environmental impact. And there's nothing at all wrong with talking about the health and environmental benefits of a plant-based diet. Doing so is great, helps dispel a lot of myths that frankly uphold and prevent people from becoming vegan in the first place or even considering veganism. So I think these conversations are great. I don't think it's a bad thing at all that these conversations and the additional studies and the additional talk in the media is a bad thing at all, just to use the correct terminology. So doing so is great, helps dispel the myth that plant-based foods are necessary in the first place, but they're benefits of a plant-based diet, not reasons for veganism. So we must not conflate the two, and we have to be really clear about the differences and then advocate accordingly. So again, another quote from my friend John, even if bacon, sausage, and other processed meats were as nutritious and as healthful as kale, you'd still be morally obligated to not eat them and to not use non-human animals as resources. So the plain truth is that there's no such thing as a health vegan or an environmental vegan. There are health-motivated people who eat a plant-based diet, and there are environmentally motivated people who eat a plant-based diet. And being clear about these differences, it's not denigrating those people who choose to eat a plant-based diet. What it's really doing is it's clarifying these important terms for the animals. And it's the truth. One example of how I incorporate this terminology, just to give you a real-life example, into my life is that when I'm referring to one of my meals, I would use the hashtag plant-based to describe the food, and then hashtag vegan life to describe my life or the context within which I'm eating that plant-based meal. Ethical vegan. So putting the word ethical in front of the word veganism or vegan, it's redundant, and I think therefore it's harmful. So veganism is by its very nature ethical and about other animals. Putting the word ethical in front implies that there's another kind of veganism, but there isn't. There are several benefits, as we discussed earlier about adopting a plant-based diet, but because one's adopted it for the environmental, health, or financial reasons, but we need to be crystal clear again about the differences between veganism and a plant-based diet. What about vegan for the animals? So this is just another redundant phrase. Quote, for the animals, it's already contained in the word vegan. So one can't be vegan for any other reason. So I just use the term vegan straight up and continually reinforce what it means. Another one that I see a lot is vegan for everything. So advocating that one can be vegan for everything, it totally dilutes the term vegan. And there's three major problems with making veganism about everything. You know the trope about I'm vegan for the animals, the people, and the planet? That would work for plant-based, but it doesn't work for vegan. So veganism, number one reason, is veganism is all the animals have. When we do this, when we say veganism can be for everything, it can be about us too, we take the only thing that the animals have from them. That's the only concept out there that protects them from their oppressors. In this world where humans torture and kill over 1 trillion animals per year, veganism is all they have. To make veganism about everything is to take the only thing they have from them, it's to take their hope. And I understand very much that it's easier to sell veganism if we say it's about everything. It's a lot easier to say, you can go vegan and it's about you and your health benefits, but it's not. And the animals are depending upon us to keep veganism about them. To make veganism about everything is to make it about nothing. It's to render the term completely meaningless. And we have other terms we can use to describe all-encompassing concepts, but let's not do that with the word vegan. So important for the animals. Reason number two that it's a problem to say vegan for everything. We invade the critical liberation concept for an oppressed class. Remember earlier when we talked about the oppressing class and the oppressed class. When we say that veganism is about humans in any way, shape, or form, when it's about us at all, we are allowing the oppressing class to invade and claim as their own the concept that was meant to protect the oppressed class from them. Social justice is for the oppressed classes. We must fiercely guard against the invasion of liberatory movements by oppressing classes. Number three reason why is veganism becomes meaningless. Let's just say, for example's sake, that veganism is about other animals and humans. Well, then what is vegan? As Lauren Ornelas of Food Empowerment Project has educated the movement about, and also she has a talk later today, don't miss it. She's educated the movement about for years. Just because something is vegan does not mean it's ethical. That is true. We need to get really comfortable with that fact. If we incorrectly make veganism also about human rights, then fruits or vegetables picked by human slaves would not be vegan. Chocolate that contains no animal derivatives would not be vegan. Clothing made with cotton picked by human slaves would not be vegan. And it's not that we need to protect the term vegan just for the sake of protecting it. We should do everything we possibly can to stop consuming even plant-based foods that were produced with human slavery, and to stop buying plant-based or synthetic, non-animal-based clothing that was produced with human slavery. But let's be clear, we're doing that because we're honoring the foundation of justice, not because of veganism, which is an anti-speciesist political position for other animals. Being clear about terminology is a critically important part of being anti-speciesist in action. It's a critically important part about being just for both other animals and humans. So what are some other ways that we can incorporate anti-oppression into our advocacy? All right, now I get to talk a little bit more about Brenda Sanders. For those of you who do not know Brenda, she's an amazing Black vegan. She's here today. I admire her so much. I could talk about how amazing she is for actually several hours. She does incredible work at the intersections of so many systems of oppression. She created a chart for intersectional activism. So I'm going to do my best to explain it. Probably won't do very well compared to Brenda, but I'm going to try just because it is an important part of improving our advocacy. So in short, if you're going to do some vegan advocacy and want to make sure that it's pro-intersectional, run it through Brenda's chart. Her chart is a flow chart. Step 1, you want to identify the issue. Step 2, identify the intersections of oppression those you will be advocating to may be experiencing. And step 3, identify possible solutions. So here's a quick example. Let's say we're concerned about the issue of animal entertainment, like a circus coming to town. Because we're taking a pro-intersectional and anti-speciesist approach in the first place, we ought to be rejecting single-issue campaigns, which I'll go on about a little bit more later, in favor of vegan advocacy. But as a side note, it's a topic that I could also go on for hours. It's a really big topic. But suffice it to say that I wouldn't attend a circus protest per se, which singles out one particular form of animal exploitation. I would do vegan education in my community instead. But while I'm doing that vegan education, I would hold the understanding that for some people who grew up in poverty, going to the circus was a special event, one that parents could aspire to take their children to, a treat. So while doing vegan education, I may talk about the circus coming to town with a deeper understanding of those I'm advocating to. As Brenda notes here, you can talk in terms of captivity and loss of freedom, engaging conversations about food deprivation, which is something that we do to animals used in a circus, and which people in poverty may have personal experience with. And we can talk about the physical abuse and the devaluing of life, but note the asterisk, which is really important on her chart on the bottom left. It says we need to be very conscious of triggers, and we can offer culturally enriching and intellectually stimulating forms of non-animal related entertainment instead. Sadly, the reality of the overwhelming majority of the AR movement does not incorporate a pro-intersectional approach, even and especially those who constantly talk about being against racism or against sexism, such as the, quote, abolitionist faction of the AR movement, the name of which I think that they ought to abandon so as not to appropriate the ongoing current struggle for the abolition of slavery and murder, modern-day lynching of Black U.S. citizens in the form of the prison industrial complex. And police brutality. This is an ongoing struggle. Unfortunately, disrespect for Black vegans and their ongoing current struggle for justice does not end with the abolitionist faction, but I did want to bring it up, and I do recommend, based on personal experience as a vegan of color, that you steer clear of that faction at all costs. The AR movement, by and large, expects people of color to shut up about racism because this is the animal rights movement. But think about that. People expect us, people of color, to leave racism at the door of the animal rights movement, but we literally cannot do that unless we leave ourselves at the door and do not enter the movement at all. In addition to being clear about some terms, such as plant-based, as we went over a little earlier, next we're going to explore some very concrete ways that we can incorporate an ethic of anti-speciesism into our advocacy. I've been developing a list of anti-speciesism rules or guides that we can use to help ensure that our animal advocacy isn't speciesist. We may be vegan, but that does not mean we're not speciesist. Because we as humans occupy the oppressing class over other animals, will always be speciesist. Just like some white people might take anti-racist positions, that doesn't mean that they're not racist. It doesn't mean that they're not benefiting from the system of the oppression of people of color. So we must fiercely guard, really fiercely guard against speciesism in our own advocacy, such as in our literature, such as our campaigns, the positions that we take for other animals. We're advocating for them by proxy. It's one of the very few movements that the oppressing class members are not advocating on their own behalf. I think that they do some advocacy. I'm not going to say that they don't have autonomy and that they're not objecting to what's going on to them. But as far as engagement in the actual social justice movement and being able to advocate for themselves in a way that humans and their oppressors always understand, that's a different story. So we do have to fiercely guard against speciesism because not that the oppressing class is often listened to, for example, in racism discussions, but at least we can say, no, stop saying all lives matter. We can at least say that. Other animals, they don't really get to say that in a way that we will understand. So I think that the rules that I've developed in guides, which are always a work in progress, they're always fluxing and growing, as a starting point, this may help. So rule number 1, no promoting less than veganism. So veganism is the ethical position against animal exploitation and use and corresponding way of living. Therefore, promoting less than veganism is promoting their exploitation. As animal advocates, we should never promote or condone less than veganism. 2, no using animals as resources. Ask ourselves if what we are promoting requires animal use. If it does, we're literally promoting animal use, such as the lab meat conversation. Using animals as resources is the problem. It will be no part of the solution. Rule number 3, abandon the ends justify the means knee-jerk reaction. We heard the word effective a lot in animal advocacy today. Oftentimes it's used by people to justify approaches to animal advocacy that are really speciesist and compromising in nature. For example, promoting something unethical, we see it all the time. It's totally unethical. Promoting like going veg in order to supposedly reach an ethical goal like going vegan. This is ends justify the means nonsense. We wouldn't accept it in the human context. We shouldn't accept it in the other animal context either. Yes, animal exploitation is at an all-time high. Yes, animal killing is absolutely at an all-time high. But not applying ethical principles is what caused us to start using animals as resources and get in this horrible mess in the first place. Applying ethical principles is what's going to end this mess and guide us out of it. Diligently and repeatedly applying ethical principles to our actions is the solution. Rule number 4, no using animals or their suffering as commodities for our campaigns or to grow our organizations. For example, in a typical animal welfare campaign, animal advocates claim to be able to reduce suffering in this way or that way, expanding egg-laying hen cage size, etc. They collect literally millions of dollars in donations that are used in a way that actually ends up making non-vegans more comfortable with animal exploitation and use and more comfortable with staying non-vegan. How many people here have, if you're vegan, you've talked to someone and said, oh, I buy cage-free eggs. I have a backyard hen. That's a problem. We need to take a position against that. So remember that in the context of our speciesist non-vegan world, non-vegans are simply going to go to another type of animal use until we disrupt non-veganism itself with vegan education. No deceiving non-vegans. Be honest with them. Tell them what you really want them to do. Tell them the ethical position that you didn't know about, and once you did, you were like, yes, that is what I want to align myself, that represents my moral positions. Tell them exactly what they're morally obligated to do if they value other animals, and help and support them in applying that position to their lives. They're obligated to go vegan, advocate for veganism, and nothing less. Tell them in an unequivocal way, which can be done in a really friendly way, that they're morally obligated to do that and provide them with unequivocal vegan resources to help. For some reason, some vegans equate being honest with non-vegans with hitting them over the head with veganism, but again, that's like a knee-jerk reaction, and it's speciesist, so again, we just want to uphold that moral minimum. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip over my analogy here and go to something else. So it was just an extension of the hitting the non-vegans over the head and how to promote. So rule number 6, no singling out certain types of animal uses. Before I go into specifics about single-issue campaigns, it's important for me to distinguish between single-issue campaigns by humans for other animals and single-issue campaigns by humans for humans or for themselves. When I critique single-issue campaigns, which I do very frequently in the animal advocacy context, I'm doing it specifically in the animal advocacy context. I'm not at all talking about single-issue campaigns, humans advocating for themselves, humans advocating for other humans who said this is how I want to be advocated for. So just to be clear, not talking about all single-issue campaigns, just the animal advocacy ones. So when we factor in the critically important analysis of oppressing oppressed class politics, we find that what is deemed problematic for single-issue campaigns by humans for other animals may not be analogous to what is deemed problematic for single-issue campaigns by humans for humans. And just as a terminology thing, single-issue campaign is a animal-related campaign to reform or end one particular type of animal use. It's often based on the way that that animal is used, whether it be single-issue campaign to advocate for larger cage space, to stop using one particular species of animal that we happen to prefer, etc. So being that we occupy the oppressing class, we have a very, very, very strong tendency to be speciesist and discriminatory in our advocacy, advocating for our favorite species, such as dogs or cats, advocating for animals that are like us, or advocating for animals that we perceive to be the most intelligent, such as dolphins. While it may feel good to advocate for the animals we have a personal preference for, we can end up doing a lot of harm and perpetuating the very speciesism that we're hoping to challenge. How many people here who've gone vegan, when you first went vegan, thought there was something inherently worse about fur? I mean, right? I thought fur was just like egregious, and meat was like egregious, but like all other uses, like backyard hen, was somehow less. But if we know that use is the problem, and we don't get involved with rating different degrees of abuse and harm, which we really ought to get out of that practice, then the playing field is level, and we realize ethically we got to get out of the use. So it's so critical that we as pro-intersectional advocates don't allow the pro-intersectional vegan movement to become infiltrated by oppressive ideologies that rank oppressions, rank abuse, all this sort of stuff. Dr. Corey Lee Wren, founder of Vegan Feminist Network, did a really great analysis of single-issue campaigns, and she put it into a really cogent essay that I'd recommend going out to veganfeministnetwork.com and reading. I don't have time to read it today, but it's called Single-Issue Campaigns Are the White Feminism of Animal Rights. So when we engage in a single-issue campaign in animal advocacy, as opposed to unequivocal veganism advocacy, we are perpetuating a white male supremacist framework. Challenging single-issue campaigns in the white-centered vegan movement gets a lot of pushback. It may be the single hottest button topic in animal advocacy debates, but I believe that's because they bank upon the same discrimination and prejudice that uphold systems of oppression such as racism and sexism. Single-issue campaigns also deprioritize less favored species. Where does that sound familiar? Less favored groups. And they prioritize the feelings of the oppressors. And they ultimately keep the oppressor-oppressed hierarchy intact. That's the last thing we want to do if we're anti-speciesist animal advocates. We need to challenge the system of speciesism, not cherry pick our preferred species or preferred uses to focus on. So instead of wasting our precious resources and invoking that, we ought to promote veganism as the moral minimum and veganism as the anti-speciesist political position that it is. Almost done. I have a couple more rules here and then I'll wrap up. So number 7, no partnering with industry. We recognize that animal-using industries exist to profit off of the use and exploitation of animals. We will see through the deception that they ever have animal interests in mind, that they're working with animal groups. It's a big lie. They know what they're doing. They're out for capitalist profit, just like they are with every other industry. Nothing's different about other animals, and they bank on us believing and thinking that there's something different. We need to be really smart about that. They never have the animal's best interest in mind. No industry that churns through 1 trillion animals per year and brutalizes and murders them has their best interest in mind. We recognize that animal interests include the right not to suffer, but also and ultimately the right to their life. We recognize that there's great benefit for the animal use industries in being recognized by animal advocates and animal groups as ever having animal interests in mind, meaning there's a great benefit from them image-wise or PR-wise from giving anyone the perception that they're working with animal advocates. We hold eternally firm for the animals about never partnering with the industry that has killed thousands of billions of them and seeks to kill thousands of billions of them more. Number 8, frame the problem correctly. Being anti-speciesist means using our limited resources of time, energy, and money as effectively as possible But in order to ensure we're taking a truly effective approach to animal advocacy, it's imperative that we frame the problem and the situation correctly. We need to frame the problem as speciesism, and its primary manifestation is the use and exploitation of all animals. If we don't, measuring efficacy and saying this method is more effective, that method is more effective, it's pointless because we're not even asking the right question to start with. For example, we may look at a single issue campaign such as the ban of greyhound racing in Australia that was supposed to be happening. It got announced in 2015. It was fought for and celebrated far and wide by vegans, but the plans for the ban were just reversed with a single councilperson's or representative's decision. And this will always happen. Don't get me wrong, I think the vegans who worked on the greyhound racing ban, their hearts were absolutely in the right place. But single-issue campaign victories in the context of a world of non-veganism, they're false victories. So we need to see through that deception. Resources directed to single-issue campaigns are resources directed away from veganism education. In this way, the pursuance of single-issue campaigns instead of veganism education is speciesist against every animal that's not currently being campaigned for, whereas veganism does cover all animals. Taking a position against speciesism is taking a position for veganism unequivocally and spending our precious resources on veganism education, because nothing at all, nothing is going to change in a significant and lasting way for other animals until the overwhelming majority of the people on this planet are vegan. And in order for that many people to be vegan, they have to know what it is, and they have to know how to do it. And that is going to be a challenge because there's so many misconceptions even now about what veganism is, and we're still a very small movement. So to summarize, we've laid the foundation. We've talked about the House of Justice with the foundation of universal principles and values. We've covered an introduction to intersectionality and pro-intersectionality, and we've talked about how we mustn't be siloed in our efforts to achieve liberation from other social justice movements. And we've touched very briefly upon a few ways the animal rights movement violates human rights and animal rights, and how that undermines the very foundation of justice that we claim that the animal rights movement exists upon. And we also went through some concrete ways we can incorporate anti-speciesism into our advocacy while analyzing whether we're being pro-intersectional with Brenda's wonderful chart. So I threw a lot at you today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I invite you to visit TAVS.org and contact me at sarah@tavs.org to get involved. Thanks so much.